Kate, hi parents.
I'm all
Um,
happy that I made it.
yeah, I'm happy too. So I'm so happy to see you. I think
Yes,
that,
likewise.
would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Edna Lugo. I've known Kate for a long time now. I consider her a dear friend, and a fellow superhero mama. You know, with our children, we experience a lot of the same things. And I'm mother to Emily and Henry. Emily is about to turn 12, and Henry just turned 13. Both of them have ADHD. Both of them have autism. Everything
Different
that comes with
kids, even
that,
same diagnosis, different kids.
a whole mixed bag for both of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and they're okay. And it's nice to know that they're okay. So
Oh my gosh, yeah. All right, so let's go on to our fun topic for the day, which is so important. And I think for some people, can bring up a little anxiety. Like if you're a parent and you're not anxious about this, your head might be in the sand. Like, because no matter where we live, I don't even think this is specific to this country. I think that we have anxiety if we have kids who are not going to necessarily stop everything, drop, and do exactly as they're told in a stressful situation. Relationship or the connection, the communication with law enforcement can be fraught. So when I saw that you had posted that you had had this talk with your kids, and was it with both of them that you had the talk?
yes, separately though, because I
Okay.
wanted to give them each their own space to have questions and
Yeah, that's a
process.
great idea. So I just want to write that down. So if you have kids, having it separately rather than together, having the talk
Mhm.
separately is a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you would talk differently about it with Emily than you would with Henry,
Mhm.
I assume. So when I saw that you posted about this and the way that you described it just was so really spoke to my heart, really, really touching and also really eloquent and really practical. So I thought that, if we could share this with other parents of atypical kids, it would be a really great service. And then it also
Mhm.
brought up something I've been thinking about for a while.
So one thing I didn't say is because I don't really see myself as of a law enforcement, because really I think I'm just a mom. I think I've been a mom even before I was mom. I just have that nurturing part of
Yeah,
me
you
with
do.
plants, with animals, with the people that I would arrest. That allowed me to see everybody through a different set of eyes, and as well share my thoughts with the people that I worked with. Which, by the way, I worked with some really fine, wonderful, wonderful people, very caring. Many of them were white. Um, so I feel really badly for those people that I know really care, because they just get clumped, generalized. They just get, put together with everyone. And I think that's equally as bad as the racism that, Black people and people of color feel. It's a problem for everybody. I don't see that it's a problem uh, just for Blacks or Hispanics. It's a problem for everybody. It's a problem for law enforcement.
Absolutely.
It's
I feel like it's a trauma that is systemic of our culture, and that, yeah, white people benefit from it, but we
Mhm.
also carry the stress of it, and
And the
that
guilt.
affects us. But that trauma can affect us, and it may
Definitely.
not be that we're getting shot in the street, but we would be healthier and better off, all of us as a culture, if we were able to shift this.
And if you knew that there was something you could do to help. And
exactly.
The way that this started, the post that you saw was that, my son is now 13, and he's as tall as I am now, which I'm 5'7", and, he's got some build to him. Yet he's this little gentle giant that still sleeps with me, and he still curls up like a ball. And then it's so funny because I say, oh honey, you're still my little yummy cake, and I still play toesy toes with him, and he's like, fine, but don't tell anybody, because I'm the eye of the tiger. I'm a snake. I eat bunnies for fun, and he's trying so hard to sound like
to be
a
tough
bad guy. Meanwhile, he's just such the opposite, and the trial of George Floyd came a little bit later, but it's just in my mind right now that when they described George Floyd, they said he was such a mama's boy, and that he would sleep with his mom. And the fact that he called out to her at the last moment, I felt that so much, because in my heart, I said, this big man, for all we know, could have been just like my boy. He could have been just like my boy. The fact is that a lot of people with ADHD, if there are inequities in the treatment that we're able to get, like I did explain to you in the past, that my kids have the privilege. My kids of color have the privilege of going to NYU, paying $550 for an evaluation. However much money it takes for a neuropsych, which can be up in the 5,000s sometimes to get them in the right school. But I also know that when that medication wears off, their impulses are all over the place. And it's very difficult to get a hold of. I mean, if it wasn't difficult, I wouldn't have had to go get help. In managing
but you had access to that help.
And I had access to that help. So a lot of the times what happens is these children turn to medicate themselves. And a lot of the times that's with alcohol, that's with drugs, that's with a lot of things. And it's really not their fault. And so if we just stop looking at people that take drugs, even the way we address them, drug addicts, that's offensive. It's people who take drugs. Why they take drugs, we don't know.
To get to the why, right?
Right. My mother was homeless. And she was abandoned. My mother had to steal to eat from the fruit stands. So that played a big part in how I did policing, because I didn't look at a thief the same. I didn't look at a prostitute the same. I had a different vision. And my mother was a special needs child as well, by the way. The apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. And so having all of this knowledge, I felt like I needed to not only have the conversation with my children, but I felt like I needed to post it on Facebook. I felt like it needed to be something that other people needed to know that I had to do.
Right, you specifically, because...
Right. Like this, they needed to know that this is a conversation that had to take place in my home.
In your home.
Knowing me.
With their friend.
Knowing me, their friend, I still worry, and I still need to be fearful.
And it brings it closer to home. Yeah.
Because once you know somebody, you see things differently. It always seems like somebody else's problem,
Right.
But when you know the children and you've interacted with these children, and you know that they can be in this type of danger, because I'll tell you right now, the complaint that, and I'm sure that you've gotten the same complaint too, is he doesn't listen. He just doesn't listen. And it's like, well, unless you connect with Henry's eyes visually, it's like his ears are his eyes, So like he does have ears, but they don't really work unless you connect with his eyes,
Yeah. With Ocean, it's often like, at least when he was younger, I would have to like touch him.
Sometimes it's a touch, a tap. You have to figure out what works. And the thing about it is, if you're going to serve a community, you have to understand your community. And that includes people with disabilities. If anything, you need to understand them even more, because they cannot do what you're asking them to do a lot of times.
Yeah, the burden is on the person who has more privilege, really. The burden is on the person, the adult law enforcement person who's carrying a gun, right? The burden is on them to figure out the situation and to meet the other person where they're at, in my opinion.
Yes, and I agree. I've been on both sides. I've been staring at a gun that's pointed at me and saying, "Oh my gosh, I've got to get home. And how do I do that? I'm terrified. My heart is racing." That you can actually see yourself breathing, like, like that kind of breathing. Your body's shaking, like you just have no control over it. On the other side of it, where my nephew just graduated New Paltz with honors, and both of them, his brother graduated not too long ago. His brother was stopped by the police in plain clothes at night. He was walking by himself, and all of a sudden, all these cars come, and he hears somebody running up on him, and his first instinct was to run. He didn't know if he was going to get robbed, and he didn't know. How would he know?
Right. They're playing
How would he know? So my nephew ended up he got stopped. He was going to run. And he said that every part of his body told him to go. But the only reason he didn't run is because he froze.
Yeah.
Then you say to yourself, well, what if he didn't freeze?
I've been doing a lot of study on the nervous system. Flight, fight, freeze. And those are there for a reason, right? So all of his instincts were sort of popping up at once, but the one that stopped him in his place was actually a really useful one.
Yes.
The only thing is, if we stay stuck there, that can be like after the fact. Like, how was he able to process this after the fact? I mean, I'm assuming that he survived.
Right. Well, yeah, he did survive. But what if they say, put your hands up, and he's frozen and he's not listening?
You literally can't. Yeah.
So is that non-compliance now, or? And you have to be able to see that and say, this child is terrified.
And it's a child.
It's a child.
Yeah.
They're all children. They're all our children, even the ones that you're arresting. They're our children. They're our future. This is what we're putting forth.
Raising. Yeah. Creating. Yeah. So Do you want to? Well, first, maybe we should just move and shake a little bit, just to get, because that was a
Yeah,
lot, you know. And I just
it
want to
was.
give
Yeah.
give an opportunity to kind of stretch up, and maybe, yeah, maybe like do some of that. Just know that your body
Mhm.
is free to move, and maybe you do a little twist and look around your room. These are actually trauma-informed practices, like yawning and rocking, and you can rock your pelvis a little bit.
Mhm.
So ways to get the oxytocin, which is like the combat, that combats the stress hormones, the love hormone, get that moving, and also to look around and know that you're actually safe in your environment. And then yawning can help. I mean, it tells our nervous system that we're safe, right? So we don't yawn if we're frozen in fear. We just don't. But by yawning, it sort of is that bottom up approach of tricking our nervous system into knowing that we're
Okay.
safe.
Wow.
So,
Mhm.
and it takes just a second, right? Like a lot of people say, I don't have time for mindfulness. I'm parenting atypical kids. But that's literally like, that's something you can do while you're parenting atypical kids.
I don't know how I would do it without mindfulness. I don't
Yeah. Oh,
I
me
don't know
neither,
how I
but I
would do
did.
it.
I mean, there were years when Ocean was younger where I really I lost sight of my own practice. I was teaching yoga, but I wasn't really. I mean, I don't know. It could have been worse, I'm sure, but I feel like now I've been able to really distill the most essential practices to something like, okay, we're talking about this thing. I can feel my nervous system kind of responding to it. The fear, even the freeze response is coming into my body, and I feel my gut clenching. All of these things are happening. Um, let's do something right now, right? That's it. Just like, let's take a breath to our bellies, let it out. And then we can have this conversation without being in like reaction mode,
Yes.
so that
Yes.
we can have this conversation. We can pass on this really important information. So,
I wanted to also add something about
yeah,
what you were saying about having the conversation with white children as well.
yeah,
And that it hadn't occurred to me that we should have these conversations about what we need to do, like the conversation about, Henry, if you ever stop, you have to put your hands where they can see them because you might look scary to someone, and
mm-hmm.
they and having to explain to him that although he's not scary, um, people do perceive his hair or his color to be something to come with some behavior issues, um, and the resentment that as a parent you feel in having to tell your child that they look scary, and even wondering like what would I have been if I didn't have all of these negative messages given to me all my life. Like you know I find myself still doing things to try to show that I'm not what you think I am. It's like a preset in there. Um, and you don't want to have to do that, but you have to. When you told me that you wanted to have this conversation with Ocean and other children, I was, that is so smart, because I don't think I think that one of the other problems is that just people just don't know. They just don't know what
Well,
we feel.
do they not know, or do they get afraid of the conversation and feel like they can escape? Like, if you had the opportunity to escape having this conversation with your kids, would you take that opportunity?
Right, absolutely.
Right? If you felt like it was optional because it wasn't about your kid, but about your
Yeah,
kid's friend, or about like the culture at large, like, would you take that opportunity to put that out? I mean, you
honestly,
might not, but
yeah.
I can understand like why
I
people
mean, I
wouldn't
have
want
to
to do
honestly
that.
say, I would probably say yes.
Yeah, and like also that idea that like, oh, my kid's not old enough yet. I don't have to talk to them about it yet because they're not old enough. Like, that is a bunch of crap. I'm sorry.
Mhm.
If your your 10-year-old, your 12-year-old is old enough, my 10-year-old or 12-year-old is old enough. And honestly, I think the burden, just like the person with power in the situation between law enforcement and a community member, the burden is on the person with more privilege. So
Well, I have the conversation about the Asian hate with
yeah.
Emily and Henry as well. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to, but I want to, because I don't want them to think it's okay to repeat something that they're hearing, or that they think might be funny and might not understand how hurtful it can be.
Yeah.
And I just definitely want them to know. So I guess I wouldn't escape the
You
conversation.
probably wouldn't, but you can understand why somebody would
Yeah,
want to,
sure.
right? Especially when it
Right.
comes to something as visceral as that. Like, what if you're standing there and a police officer comes towards you? Like, that is visceral. You know, that's something we don't want to think about. Our kids, not my kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it could, you know, and I feel like I have to have the exact same conversation with Ocean, not just to be equal or ethical or fair, but because if he doesn't know those rules, whether or not he could also be seen as bizarre as this is to me too, you know, he could also be seen as a threat through his behavior. He won't necessarily
Absolutely.
follow
Yeah.
the commands, right? But what if he's walking with a friend who's Black, or a friend who's, you know, who's Asian or Latino, like that?
He might have poor judgment. He might
put the other kid at risk.
Right.
So
And they might look at him as like, oh, what's he doing with them? Is he buying drugs or something? If you have that mentality,
but the thing is,
there's
the
so
other
many.
kid, like, he can't start running away. He can't
Right.
start doing something that might lead to a domino effect of the other kid getting hurt.
Right.
You know,
Right.
even if his whiteness protects him, that is not a good reason not to have the conversation. Like, the conversation still needs to be had, you know.
It does have to be had.
These videos were coming out about how to talk with your kids of color about this, and I'm like, where's the one for white kids? I want to show that to Ocean, you know. Like, I couldn't find the video.
Some things that you can say if you want to make your child aware, you know.
Right. Well, let's talk about those.
Yeah.
So we can put that out in the world, you know, like, if you are in an interaction with law enforcement, whether you're alone, you know, or you're with a friend, either of you could be vulnerable. You could both be vulnerable. And how are you going to stick together and survive it? Right.
Right. Scenarios. I'd like to come up with some scenarios and just ask them questions. Just ask. What would you do? What do you think would be safe?
Yeah, we have those kind of conversations so often. This particular one, you know, like, what if you were walking with your friend down the street and this big cop came up and started to, you know, ask you questions, like, what would you do? At one point he said, I would run away. And it's like, you cannot, you know, you can't, because they would see you as then you're immediately guilty, right? If you run.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But we should never stop running.
Right.
So, you know, it's like, it's a real conundrum.
Yeah, my son also. If you he goes immediately into flight mode at all times, and no one that does that deserves to die.
Right. It's not the decision. Yeah, it's not the decision of the law enforcement to.
It's not their right to take anyone's life.
Yeah. There are people who are going around and teaching law enforcement about autistic traits and how to talk to people with disabilities. Do you feel like that is a successful strategy?
Quite frankly, I feel that this profession attracts people with issues with impulses because of the dopamine release that comes with the excitement of the job.
That makes sense. I'd never thought of that before.
Most of us have the thrill-seeking personalities. Wow, I'm so glad I made it through. I think I made it to the police department because I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid of my community.
Yeah.
I understood my community. I could put myself in the other person's position, which with children like ours, not everybody can put themselves in the other position. And I'm not saying it to like excuse the behavior of like the real awful monsters that are present in the police department. I also believe that there are people that just can't see. Learning how to talk to people, well, that's wonderful when everything's nice and calm. Let's apply some pressure and see what happens. And they do some of that with like the simulators and everything, but they don't do enough of them.
But as parents, we can't really wait for that, right?
No, absolutely not.
So as
parents, what I've been doing is I've been writing to my local police department, to police headquarters. You have to realize that there are children and adults who cannot respond to verbal commands. You have to understand that there are people that cannot tell you they have expressive language disorder. That means they cannot tell you, I'm frozen. I can't talk now. I would go down the list of like all of the things that come with having a disability that might appear frightening to them, or as non-compliance or resisting or whatever other label gets attached to these people.
How can we help our kids right now to stay safer, and how can we help each other as a community to
we have to explain to them, not to worry about being in trouble.
That's a big one.
Don't be afraid about being in trouble. Understand that they are confused. You've done nothing wrong. And because you've done nothing wrong, it'll be discovered that everything will be okay. Just listen to what they're asking you to do and tell them, if you can, to call your mom. And I will get there and I will straighten everything out. Do not make any sudden movements. At all times, keep your hands up where they can see them. Don't try to turn. Don't try to explain yourself. Don't get angry if they say something that's not true. Don't, just do whatever they say. And when I get there, I will clear it all up and we'll go home and that'll be that. It'll be over.
Right. And then you could be as angry as you want once you're home, right? And because there's a lot to be angry about.
And we'll sue. Right. And then we'll sue. And the reason we'll do that is so that they can never do that to anyone else again. But we can't do any of that unless you're alive. Okay. So I always tell them, if something happens and then they're doing something, if they go to put your hands, pull your hands back behind you, allow them to.
It's almost like you have to be like a noodle.
Yeah. If they allow, if it hurts a little bit or it's uncomfortable, you're allowed to say, ouch, that hurt. Or, but don't try not to be disrespectful. Just do as they ask and don't give them a reason or an excuse
Mm-hmm.
to hurt you, because sometimes that's all they'll need, So
Because they have
um,
impulsivity issues too.
yeah, yeah. The main thing is just they need to know that everything's okay. They're figuring it out. They're
They're
confused.
confused. I like that. Yeah, I really like
And I
that.
always put it
And just
on
like,
them. It's
yeah,
not you, it's
yeah.
them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, I mean, that's so important.
mhm.
Yeah. And what about if you are with other kids? Like if you are in a group or something?
if if you are with other kids in a group, don't leave. Step aside, allow the police officer to do what they need to do. Step aside, and if you
Mm-hmm.
have access to call that child's parent, you
Yeah.
call the parent and you tell them what's happening and get them there quickly. Just say, little Johnny or whoever it is being stopped by the police. I'm not leaving. I'm here. I'm watching everything. And then turn your recorder on and record everything that you can. Don't be
Yeah.
arrogant about it. Just say,
Mm-hmm.
officer, I'm just recording for our safety. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I have a right to record, and I'm just recording for our safety. Don't curse at them. Don't be mad. Don't be angry. And even if you are, just don't show it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think being angry or scared are really valid, you know?
It is valid. And the anger that they show might be mistaken
Mm-hmm.
for something else.
Yeah, for noncompliance or also for guilt, right?
Guilt or
Mm-hmm.
resistance or anything
Yeah.
like that. So you want to just be as cool as a cucumber as you can be, because, if you've done nothing wrong, you will have nothing to worry about. And even if you have done something wrong, it is
Mm-hmm.
not the end of the world, and it will be okay, even if you have done something wrong.
Because children do things, they make mistakes. In fact, everyone in the world makes mistakes, right?
That's right. The law recognizes that, so that by when you're a certain age, they erase all of your mistakes. Okay? So
Right.
you don't have to be afraid of anything. Just mistakes make us better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm quivering a little bit right now, I have to say. And
Are you?
yeah, and I had to breathe through tears a few times because, I want to show up brave for these conversations, but at the same time, like, we as parents have a lot of empathy in general. And that empathy was really triggered a few times when you were talking about those experiences. And I felt it like first go into my chest and then spread like hot
Oh,
lava
I'm
throughout my body.
sorry.
I'm sorry.
Henry
It is a
Henry
natural
had
response to this stuff.
yeah. Well, Henry at one point, he was very confused during the whole George Floyd thing, and he was acting out at me, and I didn't understand it. And at one point, I said, Henry, did I do something wrong? Does this have to do with George Floyd? He said, maybe. And I said, Henry, there's only one thing that I'm going to say about this, is that if I was there, that would not have happened. I would not have allowed that to happen. Black Lives Matter. I'll take you out and we'll protest. So we wrote it down, and we went to Grand Army Plaza, and he has his little sign. And it was almost
Yeah.
like I needed to prove to him that I
Mm,
wasn't one of them. And I said,
wow.
no. I said, no, Black Lives Matter. They do.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of you for caring, you know.
How did that feel for you?
I felt sad. I felt sad that he questioned my character. I felt sad about it, but I understood it. I could see how that could mess with his head. And I felt it was so important for me to do whatever it was that he needed me to do at that moment. I wish so
Yeah.
much that I could have been there. I wish so much that I could have done something, you know.
Yeah.
And I also told him, I said, Henry, I've worked with so many policemen that are not like that.
We could really make a change in one generation. Just people like
I think we
you
can.
and coming together and educating our children, creating a more inclusive world.
And understanding each other and taking the time to care about one another, you know.
Yeah. And like when those fear responses come up, rather than, you know, I know coming from my whiteness, it's so easy to be like, oh, that's someone else's thing, you know, but to go towards it and to meet it and then take at least one step today in that direction and then notice how you feel. And then that gives us more courage. And then we take another step and and then you realize that your shoulders are much bigger, right, than you thought. And I mean, I'm speaking from the perspective of a white person who sort of feels, oh, what can I do? I'm just one person. Like, no way.
I really wanted to do it because our kids need us to do it. They can't wait.
Our kids need us to do it. Yeah.
We can't wait anymore. There's no waiting. And, you know, and just because we have these experiences doesn't mean that we don't see people like you. We see you. We know your hearts. We know who cares. We know it's not your fault either, you know. So, you know, thank you.
I mean, we cannot get stuck in guilt about whose fault it is, right? We've just got to fix it. We just got to get it and change it. And start with our families.
We just have to combine forces and move forward. So thank you so much for giving me that opportunity.
I am so grateful for this conversation today.
Me too.
It's really so nice meaningful. It's wonderful seeing you. I'm so glad the kids are doing well.
Bye-bye. Take care. We'll do it again sometime, okay?
I would love that. Yeah, that would be wonderful.
All right.
That would be great.
Right. Okay. Bye-bye now.